What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Godlike Naruto x Zatanna? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. At one time they had been friends, but like a dream they fell into slumber. One of them, so caught up in his hatred for one man, allowed himself to be seduced by the words of a traitor and betrayed his home for power. The other one, driven by a promise to bring his friend back home to prevent a terrible mistake, became the light so as to guide the other from his hatred. In a place where the land was ripped asunder by a battle fought between the founders of their village, they fought and bled for the first time. The dark powers that were called upon in that battle were such that the land had nearly been torn apart again by the two children's final clash, calling forth a massive explosion which signified the end of the battle. Even though the boy who tried to save his friend refused to admit it, the friendship they had forged together had ended that day, but he refused to believe it and started a fruitless quest of salvation. For years they trained, one to save his friend, the other to kill the man who had taken everything he held dear. They met again the second time, both more powerful than the last time they had met, and fought again. One fought for his continued vengeance that had turned its sights to the home he had betrayed, and the other one fought to reaffirm his desire to save his friend. The battle was intense, with both warriors calling upon even greater powers than the last time, but once again the battle came to a draw. Now 3 years after the last battle that was held there, the two warriors stood atop the statues of the founders of their home ready to do battle once more. In the Valley of the End stood two giant statues that faced each other, holding up a hand seal as they stood taller than the waterfall between them. The two statues depicted two middle-aged men who both wore a form of samurai armor. Aside from the armor, all similarities between the two statues ended and both became the total opposite of the other. On the right side stood the statue of the Shoden Hokage, and the first and last user of the Mokuton bloodline, Hashirama Senju. He was a handsome man with long straight hair and subtle age lines and a stoic look on his face. It was an imposing image that befitted the man he had been when he was alive and when he had died fighting for his village. On the left stood the founder of the Uchiha clan, and the first recipient of the Mangekyo Sharingan, and the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, Madara Uchiha. He too was a handsome man, but in a slightly more feral way than his stone counterpart, with his long spiky hair, smooth face and his own stoic look as well. His image was intimidating, which also befitted the man he was alive. But unlike the Senju, he died betraying the village that he helped to create. On top of the statues of the two founders of Konohagakure no Sato stood two men. Both had the air of hardened war veterans who had taken up their weapons again just to face down their last enemy. These two men who stood on top of the co-founders of their village were none other than Sasuke Uchiha, the last true Uchiha, and Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of the Yondaime Hokage and the last true heir to the Uzumaki. Sasuke, who stood on top of the statue of Madara Uchiha, had not changed much since his and Naruto's last battle. He still wore his black Anbu pants, and robe-like top which had the Uchiha's red and white fan symbol printed on the back, with a purple rope wrapped around his waist and tied into a bow to act as a belt. On his waist he carried a chokuto in its black and white sheath, and on his left wrist he wore a storage seal that carried the rest of his ninja supplies. The only real difference about him was that his hair was shoulder length and in a ponytail to keep it from flying around in battle. Naruto stood on top of Hashirama Senju, had a more drastic change than his former ally that stood across from him. His hair was still golden blonde and spiky, but now had two bangs that fell past his tilted hide and framed his face, and his only visible eye was still a deep pure blue, and his right eye being covered by his hide, similar to the way his sensei, Kakashi, used to cover his Sharingan. Instead of a black and orange jumpsuit, he now wore a customized black and white skin-tight body armor that was normally worn by Anbu operatives. A red coat with black flames sewn into the hem and a white spot on the back with the Uzumaki spiral clan symbol. And hanging around his neck was a long, decorative, orange scarf that was wrapped around twice so that it could cover his lower face. On his back, the black handle of a katana could be seen before it disappeared into his red coat, and within the coat there were hundreds of storage seals which held all of his ninja supplies. On his right leg there was a holster that held his kunai, held there by bandages as the only form of weaponry or supplies, except the katana, that was not sealed into the coat. But the biggest change of all was his eye. Instead of the warm eyes that were pleading for his friend come home and forget his hatred, these eyes were cold and unyielding, eyes that had seen death and accepted it. These were the eyes of a killer, not a savior. Here we are again, Dobby. Things have changed over the years, yet we still meet here. But this time we aren't stopping until there's only one of us left standing, Sasuke said to Naruto from across. Naruto. Next time. Kill him, Naruto heard in his head. These were the last words said to him from his dead teammate, Sakura, right before she died from the wound that was unmistakably received by a Chidori. Yeah, only one of us will walk away from this alive, Teme, Naruto said in response to Sasuke's statement. What? No begging me to come home, or telling me to let go of my hatred for the place that destroyed my clan? Sasuke asked. In response to his query, Sasuke felt a spike in killing intent that emanated from Naruto, and in response started to see images of Naruto killing him in vicious and brutal ways. Not unlike what Orochimaru did years ago in the Forest of Death during the Chunin exams. For all the years that I've been looking for you, it wasn't until 2 years ago that I realized you weren't worth it, Naruto said in response to Sasuke's query. But at the sight of Sasuke's confused expression, Naruto realized that Sasuke didn't remember. You don't remember, do you? Well, 2 years ago you stuck a Chidori through Sakura, a girl who truly loved you, and left her to die. When he was told this, Sasuke shrugged off the killing intent that was rolling off of Naruto and started laughing. So you're here to get revenge for the useless girl who you had a crush on for years? That's truly pathetic, Dobby, Sasuke taunted Naruto. Naruto grit his teeth together so as to keep himself from charging Sasuke in a blind rage and wipe that insane superior smirk off his face then and there. No, her death was the one that showed me that the only true way to save you was for me to end your miserable life and move on with my own. I was over my crush on her, by the way. This is more akin to a brother avenging the death of a little sister, Naruto told him while reaching into his coat slowly so as not to draw attention to it. It's because of her death that I won't show you any more mercy, so goodbye, Naruto said before he suddenly hurled a handful of shuriken at Sasuke. Sasuke saw this and dodged by jumping off of the statue of Madara towards the waters below. Naruto predicted that this would happen and reached into his coat again, unsealed more shuriken, and proceeded to throw them at the still airborne Sasuke before jumping himself. The shuriken hit Sasuke, but there was a puff of smoke, and instead of Sasuke being impaled by multiple shuriken, there was only a rock. Damn it, Kawarimi, Naruto said. He landed on the water and looked around for his missing enemy before he heard, Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Fire release. Fireball Jutsu. And jumped away from the massive fireball that was flying to where he had landed and found Sasuke with his Sharingan activated. They stared each other down for a moment, waiting for what would happen next, before they charged each other, drawing their swords, both moving at Anbu-level speeds. Without saying a word or making a hand seal, Naruto created a shadow clone right before he and Sasuke clashed and had it dive low in front of him. Naruto then jumped onto the back of the clone and used it as a springboard and jumped over Sasuke, flipping over right behind Sasuke and slashing at Sasuke's back, only for Sasuke to turn around and parry the strike at the last second. From there it became an intense Kenjutsu battle, and both were struggling against each other, for whenever one of them gained the advantage it would almost instantly be taken away by the other and vice versa. Naruto eventually overextended on one of his strikes, and Sasuke took advantage of the deadly mistake by stabbing Naruto through the heart with his Chokuto. Only for the Naruto he stabbed to explode into a puff of smoke before he heard Naruto say, Futon. Shikogyoku, wind release. Vacuum sphere. And spun around just in time to see Naruto suck in a deep breath and spit out a barrage of high-speed bullets made out of wind. Jumping out of the way, he landed on the cliff face of the valley and stuck to it with his chakra. He took a breath to steady himself and thought, who would have thought the Dobby would be this much trouble for an elite? But that proved to be a mistake, as he was instantly surrounded by several kunai. Sasuke almost blew them off as poorly aimed, but he noticed, to his horror, that each and every kunai had an explosive tag wrapped around the handle, and turned towards Naruto, who held his hands in the snake hand seal. Before Sasuke could do anything, Naruto said the word that spelled his demise, boom, and with that the tags exploded. Naruto waited for any sign that Sasuke had survived, and he didn't have to wait long, for out of the smoke came a barrage of shuriken. Naruto dodged the instruments of death only for the shuriken to curve around him and wrap him up tightly so that he couldn't move. When that was done, Naruto saw the smoke clear and saw Sasuke standing there with the wires that were attached to the shuriken in his hand with that damn superior smirk on his face. "Whoops, almost forgot about that one," Naruto said, kicking himself for falling for such a simple trick. "As good as you are, Dobi, you still can't stand up to an elite like myself. So sorry to say, but this is goodbye," Sasuke said, and then put all the wires into his mouth, starting up a sequence of hand seals before declaring his jutsu, Kaden. Ryuka no Jutsu, Fire Release. Dragon Fire Jutsu, after which the wires he was holding in his mouth caught on fire and the flames started to travel down the wires towards Naruto. The flames reached a struggling Naruto, who was then engulfed in an intense inferno. The fires from the attack raged for almost 30 seconds before they finally died down so Sasuke could appreciate his work, only for there to be nothing. There should have at least been ashes, but there was nothing. Sasuke started to look for Naruto and turned just in time to receive a knee to the face. Sasuke was too stunned to do anything to retaliate. Naruto landed in a crouch before springing back into the air to perform a mid-air spinning kick, and declaring his attack, Konoha Senpu, Leaf Whirlwind, and sending Sasuke flying into one of the walls of the valley. Sasuke dug himself out of the cracked wall where he had been launched into. He was barely able to stand when he was forced to duck under the blade of a Fuma shuriken that stuck into the wall. Looking at it, he then whirled around to see Naruto looking at him with his own superior smirk, albeit not insanely. "What were you saying about being an elite, Sasuke-chan?" Naruto said in a taunting voice. This riled Sasuke up badly as he was forced to make an assessment of the situation. Unlike their previous battles where they had taken about equal amounts of damage, and Sasuke had become blind because of his overuse of his Mangekyo Sharingan the last time they fought each other, this time he had barely done any damage to Naruto and he was left with a busted lip and possibly broken nose. It was really starting to piss the last Uchiha off. "Damn you, Dobi, damn you," were Sasuke's thoughts as he stared at the superior smirk on Naruto's face that was really pushing Sasuke to the edge. How dare this dead last Dobi look down on him? He was an Uchiha, an elite, he was supposed to be invincible. However, arrogance could not be translated into skill. "Damn you, Dobi," Sasuke said as went through a familiar set of hand seals to the blonde and called out his attack, Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu, Fire Release. Fireball Jutsu, and sent another massive fireball towards Naruto. If he had not been so caught up in his own arrogance, he would have seen Naruto going through a brief set of hand seals and not moving to dodge the attack. Then, right after the Uchiha launched his attack, he suddenly felt disoriented and heard Naruto cry out, "Futon! Daitappa, Wind Release! Great breakthrough!" and he was left wondering why the Dobi would launch an attack that would only enhance his own. Was he crazy? Sasuke then looked up to see two Narutos who were standing near the wall that he was standing by only a second ago. He then realized what had happened. The shuriken that he had dodged had actually been a hanged shadow clone that had lain in wait until the real Naruto had substituted himself with Sasuke to take his own attack. Only to add insult to injury, the clone then launched a wind jutsu to enhance the fireball, turning it blue. That was coming faster than Sasuke could move, so Sasuke had no chance in hell to dodge the attack. All this went through Sasuke's head before he was engulfed by his own fireball, which then proceeded to explode. After the fires had settled, there was nothing but smoke and ash, but then Sasuke flew out of the smoke covered in first-degree burns. "Damn you, Dobi, how? How did you become so powerful? Last time we were evenly matched, but now you're more powerful than ever. What changed that made you more powerful than before?" Sasuke demanded, unable to comprehend how Naruto was able to completely outmaneuver him on whatever he did. It was infuriating to his ego. Naruto looked coldly upon Sasuke before answering, "I've always been this strong. Whenever we battled I would hold back so as not to hurt you, but now the gloves come off. You killed one of my precious people and that is unforgivable, so I will kill you so that I don't lose any more to you," he told Sasuke. And when he said that, something in Sasuke had broken. The Dobi, the dead last in the academy, had always been this strong? He had held back just to uphold a promise to some useless girl he had a crush on? Even if he said that, Now that Sasuke looked back on the fight, he could now tell that Naruto was still holding back, and that thought was truly terrifying to the last Uchiha. But his pride overrided his sense of self-preservation that was telling him to run, and screamed, "You damn Dobi!" before weaving through 3 short hand seals, and crouching down, gripping his right arm with his left, and gathering lightning chakra into his hand, with the sound of birds chirping from the electrified hand. Naruto, however, did not focus on the lightning in his former teammate's hands and said, "Find another insult, you're like a misprinted copy of Icha Icha," which only served to enrage Sasuke, further causing him to charge blindly at Naruto. Seeing Sasuke charge him, Naruto sighed. This was starting to get boring. At first, playing with Sasuke had been fun, but now it was just downright humiliating. Deciding to get just a little serious, Naruto formed a Rasengan, spiraling sphere, one-handed, and charged as well. Sasuke, seeing this, charged even faster than before, expecting a clash like the last time, hoping to display his superiority. Instead of a clash like before, just when the two shinobi were about to meet in the middle, Sasuke thrust out his lightning-encased hand only for Naruto to duck under it and thrust his own attack into Sasuke's torso. "Rasengan, spiraling spare," he cried out, as Sasuke felt the attack grinding into his body and did the only thing he could do. He screamed in pure agony before Naruto's attack expanded itself and exploded, launching him away. Sasuke was sent back spinning at a high speed before he impacted another part of the valley and falling into the water below. When he lifted himself up, he looked very much worse for wear. His clothes were pretty much destroyed, with only his pants, rope belt, and the sleeve and collar of his top left over, which was soot-stained from the wind-enhanced fireball he had been hit with. On his chest was a prominent spiral burn where the Rasengan had impacted, and blood was running down from his mouth. His chokato had long since been lost, and the seal he carried that had his ninja supplies had been incinerated by his own attack. In other words, he looked like hell, and he was screwed. "I'm disappointed, Sasuke. I expected more than this from the revered and elite Uchiha. What happened to all that confidence you had earlier? Because right now all I'm seeing is a pathetic and childish excuse of a shinobi," he said mockingly. That was a low blow to Sasuke, because ever since childhood he had been praised as a genius in the shinobi arts. But now, years later, to have someone he considered being inferior to him insult his skill and prowess was nothing less than a kick to the nuts. So in response to the insult, he activated his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and spoke the one word that spelled the demise of anyone who looked him in the eye. "Tsukuyomi," only for it to not work. "What the? Tsukuyomi?" He tried again, only for it to fail once more. "Wondering why your little piece of hell won't work, Sasuke-chan?" Naruto asked the perplexed Uchiha, who was so confused he didn't notice that he nodded. "Well, you see, after you killed Sakura, I asked Hokage-sama for the key to the Uchiha library so that I could study the weaknesses of the Sharingan. He immediately refused. However, he accidentally dropped the key, which I proceeded to take. I spent several nights looking through your library until I came across a secret compartment that held a book that made a reference to your evil eye right there. In that book I found the only significant weakness of your little genjutsu. It requires direct eye contact with both eyes." Naruto finished, "And in case you're wondering, I still have my eye, so I didn't do anything wasteful like cut it out just to take care of your little mind rape toy. You're not worth it," he finished. Sasuke stood in shocked silence until, "Damn you, Dobi. How dare you think you're better than me? Me, an Uchiha of the invincible Uchiha clan?" Sasuke raged as anger reached the boiling point. "Fine, I'll just destroy you and prove how superior to you that I am." "Susanoo," he cried before he was shrouded by a cold energy that just seemed to suck the warmth out of the air. The energy started to take shape, forming an ancient shrouded warrior carrying what looked like an energy sword and a shield that seemed like it could double as a crossbow. "Now die, Dobi!" Sasuke screamed, and the ancient warrior shroud swung its sword at Naruto, who jumped out of the way and landed out of the sword's range, only to have to move immediately afterward because the shield did double as a crossbow and launched bolts of black fire at him. He kept this dance up for a while, but despite his aloof attitude he was actually very nervous. Sasuke had the upper hand now, and that was never a good thing. Naruto was then hit with a surge of inspiration before he turned tail and ran away from Sasuke. Sasuke, who was surprised by this action, smiled maniacally, thinking that the Dobi was trying to escape from his vast power, and only launched more black fire at the retreating blonde. He never noticed the large chakra spike from Naruto, now using chakra to run up the wall, whom had slipped into sage mode, his eyelids now a bright orange and his eyes yellow with a bar-like pupil to signify his transition. With a combination of chakra enhancement and raw power, Naruto launched himself into the air, where he created a Rasen Shuriken without clone assistance and threw it at Sasuke, calling out, Senjutsu, Futon, Rasen Shuriken, Sage Art, Wind Release, Spiraling Shuriken. The flying Rasengan variation flew towards the shrouded Uchiha only for him to bring up his crossbow shield to hold it back. The two forces struggled against each other briefly, but the Uchiha was able to repel the attack and launched it away from him clear across the valley, where it exploded against the statue of Madara Uchiha in a massive burst of millions of wind blades. Sasuke turned away from the failed attack to see Naruto still in the air, only something was wrong. Naruto was up in the air above him, covered in a golden flame like chakra, with seals covering his body and a similar seal-covered trenchcoat, and he seemed to be charging up a massive attack. It had all been a distraction. Naruto had launched the Rasen Shuriken at him, hoping that he would block. That would allow him proper time to change into his Kyuubi chakra shroud and charge up the only attack he knew that had any hope of taking down the deranged Sasuke. The Bijudama. Sasuke, not one to be outdone, charged up his crossbow shield with as many black flames as he possibly could, and aimed his charged-up weapon at Naruto. Meanwhile, Naruto finished charging up his attack and transformed into his full nine-tailed state and swallowed the black orb of compressed chakra, the ground collapsing beneath him as he prepared to launch his most powerful attack. Drop dead, Sasuke yelled at the top of his lungs as he launched his Amaterasu bolt at the image of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Bijudama, tailed beast ball. The nine-tailed Naruto cried as he launched the infamous power of the Biju. The two attacks collided against each other, each one vying for dominance. However, both were totally equal to each other. The attacks were so powerful that they caused a massive shockwave to tear through the area and cause a small earthquake. However, both attacks took their toll on the users, and it was now a battle of wills. What neither of the two warriors noticed was that a large crack appeared in midair right above where the two attacks collided. Naruto reverted to his human form but continued to use the Bijudama, and Sasuke lost the Susanoo and was unable to continue his attack, which led to his last sight being him looking on in horror as Naruto's attack obliterated him. The last Uchiha had fallen. For once Naruto had done what was right for him to save his friend from the darkness and his own hatred, kill him. It was then that Naruto noticed the crack in the air and studied it warily. He knew from experience that whenever something like a crack or hole appeared in midair, it never ended well. That was his experience when he battled Kyuubi for control over its power. Well, that was in an interdimensional space created so that a Biju could do battle against its container for absolute control. So maybe the ominous hole that was starting to suck him in would be different. Wait, suck? Naruto then noticed that the crack was starting to suck him in. So he started to struggle, but the combination of exhaustion from overusing the Bijudama and the sheer force that the hole was pulling him with made the struggle futile. Before long, he was pulled into the inky blackness that lay within the crack and within moments passed out from exhaustion. After he disappeared into the crack, it faded from existence, as if it had never been there at all. In the universe, there are many truths. One of those truths is that there is actual magic, and another is that in any universe, Lex Luthor is an obsessive, evil, arch-bastard. However, in all universes, a truly terrifying sight is that of a cranky, sleep-deprived female, even more so when said female is a magician with actual magical power. That female magician just happened to be in Vegas for a show at an all-night club, and her name is Zatanna, Zatara, or Z if you prefer. Now, when a magician performs at an all-night club in Vegas, they would usually sleep for the entire day. And she failed to because of a completely random set of events that were out of her control and could have obviously been avoided if she had just used her powers to fly to Sin City. Her mistake: she decided to fly on commercial airlines instead of first class or using flight to get there because she didn't feel like it. Because of that, she was kept up all day by an obnoxious little brat who didn't want to sleep, whose mother let him push her around and wouldn't discipline him. Upon arrival to Vegas, she figured she'd be able to catch up on her sleep at her hotel. But it was not to be. Terrorists, for some reason, decided to target the airport she arrived at, which forced her to take them down before any civilian casualties could occur. Thankfully, she wasn't one of the more well-known heroes, or else she would have been bombarded by raving hero fans for an autograph like Superman or The Flash. Instead, she was subjected to several hours of interrogation from incompetent law enforcement who thought she may have been a villain who got annoyed at her compatriots and decided to take them down out of irritation. The Justice League was able to call in and straighten out the whole situation, and the cops let her go. By then, it was too late. She had 30 minutes before her show, and would have to perform without a good amount of sleep. She used her power to teleport to the back entrance of the club she was to perform at and went into her dressing room to change, magically, into her stage and superhero costume of a low-cut blouse that showed a healthy amount of cleavage, lion tamer's coat, high-cut tights, thigh-high transparent stockings, and a top hat. After changing, she proceeded to give the club the best magic show they had ever seen. Thank God she had actual magic instead of the mundane, everyday magic other magicians used. After the show was over, it was nearly dawn and she was running on empty and getting cranky. Her mood did not improve when one of the sleazy patrons of the club tried to cop a feel on her ass as she was walking back to her dressing room through the crowd. It took all of her willpower to not say, "Castrate him," backwards, and instead of "just that awful man," the unspecified order would castrate any man around her. It was times like those that really hated being a noble hero, but at the end of the day it was worth it. At least that's what heroes told themselves. So, she just settled for delivering a magically enhanced kick to his family jewels, which was also a reason she enjoyed having actual magic. After giving the pervert his just desserts, she headed back to her dressing room where she set a reservation for a nice hotel so she could catch up on the sleep she lost. She teleported to the hotel, after forwarding her credit card number, and paid for the room, where she proceeded to take a shower before going to bed. Her luck was not that good, because when she was about to lay her head on the pillow there was a golden flash in her room which roused her back into accursed awareness. Now standing in her room was a tall man in a form-fitting blue outfit, golden face mask, gold gauntlets, boots, and cape was none other than Dr. Fate, the Lord of Order in this universe. What is he doing here, Zatanna thought, praying to any deity that existed in the universe that he was here on a social call and not here to request a favor. "Zatanna, I require your assistance," he said in a wise voice that only came with years of experience. "I require your assistance, aka I need a favor." And when Dr. Fate needed a favor, you couldn't refuse him, because it might result in the end of the world as we know it. How did she know? Well, the last time she turned down an interdimensional entity's request for help, it nearly resulted in the apocalypse. Zatanna groaned, wondering why she couldn't catch a break in the last 24 hours. Changing her clothes magically, she idly wondered what the penalty for attempting to slaughter the Lord of Order would be, but she put those sleep-deprived, sadistic thoughts aside for now. "Yes, doctor, what do you need?" she asked in a tired voice. "You should really sleep more, Zatanna," he told her in a matter-of-fact voice. "I was about to," she thought. "But right now I would like for you to check on something near your current location," he said. "About half an hour ago there was a disturbance within the dimensional rift. I checked it over and it seems that there was a rip that has since repaired itself, but not until after dropping something off before it closed," he finished. "Interesting," Zatanna mumbled, "but why do you need me to check it out? It's not like we don't have our own share of interdimensional visitors, like Karen or Raven," she told him, thinking of the two beings. "Indeed, you are correct, Zatanna, but this being has a similar feeling to Trigon," he said, which shocked Zatanna. Just thinking of that being sent shivers up her spine because of all the destruction he had caused, but what scared her was that there was a similar being to Trigon that was in their dimension now. One was bad enough, but now that there were two, she was terrified to even think of it. They had barely fought off Trigon when he tried to get into their dimension the last time. "So, you want me to scout it out in case it's a threat?" she stuttered out. "Yes, I would do it myself, but I am currently engaged at the moment," Dr. Fate told her. "However, it may not turn out to be a threat. It's not as malicious as Trigon, or even Raven, just merely as powerful." Though that did calm down Zatanna a bit, she was still a bit nervous because there was another being that was just as powerful as the most malicious entity in the universe. Hopefully, it wasn't confrontational. She didn't know how well she would be able to handle it. "Thanks for the info. Now if you can tell me where I can find it, I'll be on my way," Zatanna said. "The being is 2 blocks to the west of your current location, in an alley." "Thank you for your assistance, Zatanna," Dr. Fate said, before disappearing in another burst of gold light. Zatanna sighed. "Well, I better get moving so I can get some sleep," she said to herself before walking outside, onto her balcony, and flying off. Naruto lay in the alley where he had been dropped by the crack for almost an hour, but when the rising sun shined on his face through the alley's opening he was forced to wake up. Deep blue eyes opened only to quickly shut again as the harsh rays of the sun glared into them before the body they belonged to groaned, and he forced himself into a sitting position against the wall of the building. He opened his eyes once more to take a look around, obviously avoiding looking at the sun and get his bearings straight. With a simple once-over, he discerned the obvious. He definitely wasn't in the Valley of the End, and there was no crack anywhere around him except on the buildings he was surrounded by. What the hell had happened to him after he had killed Sasuke? The last thing he remembered was being too exhausted to move, and being sucked into the crack before blacking out. Because of the situation he was in at the moment, he spent the moment to reflect on past experience. I knew it, I freaking knew it. It's never a good thing when a hole appears out of nowhere and just hangs in the air. I swear to Kami if I ever meet Murphy, I will kick his ass for making that stupid, thrice damned law, he ranted to himself. If anyone had passed the alley at that moment, they would have been presented to a ragged blonde guy talking to himself in Japanese and sent him on a one-way train ride to the loony bin. Luckily for Naruto, nobody passed by. But that didn't mean Murphy's law wasn't in effect. His ranting continued for a few more minutes before he stopped ranting and just sat still. It was a few more minutes before he heard the one voice he wasn't imagining ask, "Are you finally done? You disturbed a really great nap." He had been wondering when the demonic presence in his gut would start talking again. "Screw you. Go chase a rabbit or something, I'm in distress here," Naruto told the Kyuubi no Kitsune, which had been sealed in him since the day he was born. He just forgot one little thing about the fox. "Why, Naruto-kun, I would love that. That's just what I need to relieve me of all the stress that's built up over the years, a good old-fashioned romp. It's really been too long since I've been with a man. Thanks for the offer," the Kyuubi teased him. "Oh right, sorry, I forgot for a moment, you're a woman," Naruto apologized. That's right folks, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, strongest of the Biju, is a woman. She had told Naruto after the battle with the Jubi had ended. Safe to say, every kunoichi that Naruto had told afterward had had a field day, and every male within Konoha had taken a massive blow to their pride, based on the fact that it had always been assumed that the Kyuubi was male. And don't forget it. By the way, can you use shadow clones to bypass the seal again? It's been a while since I was able to stretch my legs, she inquired. Checking his internal stores of chakra, Naruto came to his conclusion. Sorry Kurama, I've got a mild case of chakra exhaustion, and even if I use the emergency seal I'd only have enough for wall and free running. After I've regained my chakra I'll let you out. Okay, he thought to her. Okay, she answered him. Naruto raised the right sleeve of his coat to reveal a sealing tattoo on his arm. It was designed to take a small amount of chakra and keep it as an emergency store in case Naruto found himself alone and in need of an added boost. Naruto had designed it shortly after the war was over, having taken an interest in seals after his teacher passed away, and it was what his newly discovered father had been famous for. He had created many seals and even recreated the Hiraishin, flying thunder god, with the help of clones. It had been requested by Kakashi, the newly instated Nandame Hokage, that the emergency seal be printed onto every ninja in the village, to which Naruto agreed. Naturally, after activating the seal, Naruto felt less like shit and more like a shinobi. With his stores partially replenished, Naruto stood up and focusing chakra into his feet ran up the building to get the lay of the land. Reaching the top of the building, Naruto was taken completely by surprise when he found himself in a place full of the tallest buildings he had ever seen. Some were moderately high, but then there were others that were bigger than even the council building in Tetsu no Kuni, Land of Iron, where the 5-cage summit had been held. The surprising thing about this place wasn't the size of the buildings though, it was how large the city, and he was pretty sure it was a city, was. It was at least as large as any of the 5 great shinobi villages alone, and filled with buildings that were, at least, no smaller than the cage mansions back home. Wow, Naruto said as he stared out at the city. You can say that again, Kurama affirmed her host's eloquent choice of words. She was speechless as well, and that was saying something. Being several millennia old, She thought she had seen everything the world had to offer, but this took her off her high horse, because she was in the same boat as her container. Looking past the tall buildings, Naruto looked at the environment that the city had been built in, and his assessment could be summarized in one word. Dry. He would have compared it to the deserts of Kase no Kuni, land of wind. But it had plants that, as sparse as they were still there. And there were large rocks all over the desert, along with large mountains in the distance. He settled for saying that it was some strange mixture between the deserts of Kase no Kuni, land of wind, and the mountain valleys of Tsuchi no Kuni, land of earth. Tearing his eyes away from the landscape and looked towards the ground in the city. Instead of beaten dirt paths for roads, he found something that was similar to the cobble-stoned paths that were not uncommon in Yuki no Kuni, land of snow, better known as Haru no Kuni, land of spring, but smoother. Instead of people or carriages, however, there were metal contraptions that looked similar to the vehicles that Koyuki had shown him on his last trip to his friend's country. She had said that farther along the line that the developers predicted the vehicles would get smaller, faster, and more powerful in the future. That must have been what the contraptions on the ground were. To the sides of the paved roads, there were people walking all over the place and into buildings that he swore were some kind of casinos. He made a mental note to visit those later to see if he was right and possibly make some money, and into other places that seemed like hotels. Looking around, he spotted an alley next to one of the masses of people, so he decided to jump across the buildings until he got to it and dropped down. Keeping to the shadows that were produced from the angle of the rising sun, and listened in on some of the conversations of the people that passed by. Listening in, he found that the language the people were speaking was similar to that of a trading partner that Konoha gained after the war had ended. In order to better trading relations, it had been mandatory that academy students and active ninja learn the language so that no mistakes were made when the supply came in and there was more or less than there was supposed to be. While he listened to the people chatter, he found out that they were tourists, whatever those were, and he was in a place that was nicknamed Sin City. Come to think of it, didn't Tanzaku Town have a similar nickname? Where was he? 5 minutes after Naruto had left the alley to explore the city, Zatanna arrived. She expected to find a lot of things when she found the entity that fate had told her about, but taking a look around she found only an empty alley. She sensed some form of residual energy that she had never felt before, and mixed in with that energy was some kind of demonic presence. Whatever this being was, she now understood why fate had wanted her to find it. If someone like Morgan Le Fay got her hands on this thing, they'd be in trouble. She began feeling out for the creature's power, and was surprised when she felt that power going straight up a wall. Flying up, she felt around and continued to follow the power that had left in the direction of the Vegas Strip. Sighing to herself, she flew off. Sometimes I really hate my job, she commented to herself as she followed in the footsteps the creature she was chasing, as it seemed to have jumped from building to building. As she followed the scent in a way, she happened to look down and saw something that appealed to her sleep-deprived mind, and if she weren't so tired it would probably appeal to her even more. Coming out of an alleyway was a young man, maybe a couple of years younger than herself. He had blonde hair with bangs that framed his face and blue eyes with 6 strange lines that looked reminiscent to whiskers, 3 on each side of his face, and was perfectly tanned. His body, while not bulky like Superman and was also not scrawny like the Flash, seemed to be built for hard work and speed, and was covered by jeans and a white t-shirt with an orange spiral with a triangle that looked kind of like a leaf. He carried a backpack suited for hiking. She briefly wondered if he was lost and had wandered into town, but those thoughts were for another time. Sadly, she couldn't just float down, switch clothes, and ask his name and possibly for a date, because of the favor to Dr. Fate. Plus, he was one out of a sea of faces here in Vegas. She would most likely never see him again. But, for now, she had a job to do. Still following the scent, she couldn't help but think about the man she had seen. She didn't know what it was about him, but without doubt he had been one of the most attractive men she had ever seen. She didn't know why, but she had felt an urge when she saw him, to just fly over, pluck him up, and fly right back to her hotel and set up a spell so as to avoid any unwanted interruptions, so that she would be able to come out satisfied and be damned of that favor. Zatanna was no stranger to the pleasures of the flesh, but it was the first time she had felt desire spring up on her like that. She continued on with her search and finally came down into another alley where some of the energy she had been tracking suddenly coalesced, like its use had been needed for some unknown task before it left the alley. Changing her clothes and hair color magically, She walked out into the crowd the energy lead to, and from there it just disappeared. That was strange, no energy she had tracked before had just up and vanished, but it didn't matter, she had lost her target and now she had to tell Dr. Fate, This should be fun, she said to herself before slipping into another alley, changing out of her civilian clothes and into her costume and flying back to the hotel where she would hopefully soon be subjected to blissful unawareness. Arriving back onto the hotel balcony of her hotel, she entered her room when there was a sudden burst of gold light which signified the entrance of the very familiar Lord of Order. Zatanna, you're back. Has the being been found? Dr. Fate asked her. Unfortunately not, Doctor. I tracked it to an alley near the Vegas Strip but it suddenly disappeared when I followed it into a crowd, she reported to Fate. I have a show this afternoon, so after I'm done I'll spend the night looking. Very well, thank you Zatanna, he said before he left with his usual flashy exit, without waiting for a reply. Always a pleasure, Doctor, Zatanna thought before changing into her nightclothes and slipped into the confines of her bed. Now she could slip into the land of dreams, and hopefully meet that blonde-haired, blue-eyed god. Wait, where did that come from? Okay, she really didn't need this right now. What was her problem anyway? Oh wait, she knew, she needed to get laid. But hopefully by a certain blonde-haired blue-eyed guy. Okay, seriously, she needed to sleep, and the last thing that was going to help her with that endeavor was being all hot and bothered. Achoo, was the sound from the blonde ninja who was currently walking through the city in his civvies, as he liked to call them. Wiping his nose, he asked, why'd I feel like saying something Ero Sennin would write about now? Probably because some smokin' hot woman is having very explicit dreams about you, Kurama replied, going with something that would make Jiraiya of the Sannin proud. If only she knew how right she was. Yeah right, it's 10 in the morning. Everyone who's old enough to have those dreams is awake. Who sleeps this late? He responded to Kurama. Besides, I haven't let any woman that we've passed get a good look at me since we walked out of that alley. Whoever said genjutsu was useless can suck it. You can only use genjutsu because of those seals you tattooed onto your body, or the detection seals, so you don't get caught in one either, Kurama pointed out to her host. Well, excuse me for not wanting a repeat of the Itachi incident after the war ended. Why I didn't get into Fuinjutsu until after the war, one have no idea. It's taken care of a lot of problems. I've ended up creating seals that could benefit the village if mass-produced, recreated the Hiraishin, and currently have a few projects that I came up with in progress. Naruto berated himself for that oversight. He could have saved more people during the battle with the Jubi, but it wasn't doing him any good to dwell on the past or the friends that he lost. You're right, the seals you created are useful, especially when you let me test them out. Speaking of which, are the gloves almost done? Kurama inquired. Done and waiting for a test drive, Naruto told her. Wait, what were we talking about? I don't know, Kurama responded, but I think that maybe we should find a way to make some kind of money. Yeah, but Naruto started only to be cut off by a loud bang that seemed to come from a big building from across the road, where there seemed to be several men wearing black masks over their faces and storming into the building, waving around black pieces of metal that everyone seemed to be afraid of for some reason. The reason the people were scared became obvious when one of the men decided to warn people from running and fired at someone close to the wall, barely missing them, and the wall seemed to explode when a small, fast-moving object impacted against it. Within 5 minutes the building was surrounded by several of the vehicles Naruto had speculated on earlier, all with red and blue lights flashing, indicating that it was an emergency. From what Naruto could tell, the responders to the emergency were trying to negotiate with the men holding the hostages in the building. It seemed like they could use some help. Good thing he applied those reparation seals on his clothes and armor. Slipping into an alley, Naruto unsealed his gear and a smoke bomb. Throwing the bomb to the ground, he quickly changed into his armor, coat, scarf, and weapons for everyone to see after the smoke cleared, and after checking his chakra stores, he concluded that he had enough to perform a few mid-level jutsu, which would be enough if what he had planned out worked. Running to the top of the building he was near, Naruto studied the building, which he guessed to be some kind of bank, where the hostages were being held. There were more than 5 armed goons in the building but less than 10, with over 30 hostages on the ground floor. The building was 2 stories tall, with the first floor being larger than the second to house the atrium where the hostages were being kept. Getting everything he needed from his vantage point, he jumped across the street to the building across from him. Landing in a crouch, he stood and walked over to a door that was placed on the roof and checked it. It was locked. Thanking Kami for his training in his second affinity, he loaded one of his fingers up with lightning chakra and poked the keyhole in the door, which resulted in a clicking sound, signifying that the door was unlocked. Opening the door, he put his fingers in a cross shape and said, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu," creating 3 solid copies of himself. Looking at the clones, he told them, "You know what to do," to which they nodded before transforming into 3 mice and scurrying off. Moving down the stairwell, Naruto cast a low-level genjutsu that would mask most of his movements. Normally he wouldn't waste his time with it, seeing as most experienced, or sometimes inexperienced, shinobi would be able to sense him out, but these men weren't shinobi, so there was hardly any need for caution. Heck, if it weren't for the hostages, he wouldn't have even bothered with the genjutsu in the first place. Upon reaching the landing to the ground floor, Naruto found one of the thugs. He was of average height and build, and that was almost all that Naruto could discern aside from the fact that he seemed twitchy. Sneaking up to him silently, Naruto chopped him in the back of the neck, which caused the thug to fall unconscious. Naruto caught him before he could fall to the ground and placed him against the wall before placing privacy seals so that he couldn't alert the others that something was wrong, and put intense gravity seals on the level of Lee or Guy to keep him from moving. Naruto continued this process 3 more times before he made it to the atrium. Despite his genjutsu, he needed to stick to the shadows and let his shadow clones do their jobs. It would take time to set up, and he could wait. After all, these people's lives were more important than his old brash shoot first ask questions later attitude. While he was waiting, the hanged shadow clone mice were slowly making their way across the room, taking care to avoid the obvious leader and going for the flunkies to take them out quietly so as to perform a surprise takedown while he was busy procuring an escape for his gang. One of the women saw one of the mice and was about to scream when she was surprised by the mouse bringing its little fingers up and forming a sign that told her to shush. Following the mouse's advice, as strange as it was, she stayed quiet. No one witnessed this, except a well-developed girl with white as snow hair with an eye patch over her right eye, who upon seeing this narrowed her remaining eye. She had been about to take care of the robbers with a plan that provided little fuss and very few casualties, but held back to see what would happen if she waited a little longer. Each of the mice followed each flunky and placed them under a genjutsu that convinced them that they heard noises in separate but secluded corners. When they were in position, the 3 mice unhanged and proceeded to knock out each of the thugs and placing them down gently, after which the 3 clones picked up the weapons and transformed into each of the thugs they had knocked out. The transformed trio then stalked up to the leader with the real Naruto going around him. "Well guys, pretty soon we'll all be rollin' in dough, $4 million to just the 4 of us. Of course, after we leave the rest of those losers in the stairwell to be caught while we get away. However, we might need to take a hostage to make sure we're not followed. How about that white-haired broad so we can have some fun? Sure, she has 1 eye but she still has a nice body, you can't deny that," the man said with no idea that anything was wrong. But when nobody laughed like they usually did, he felt that something weird was going on right then and turned around asking, "Guys, what's going on? Why aren't you laughing?" and started when everyone started laughing, a laugh that sent chills up his spine. "Oh, that was quite the plan, boss," one said in a tone that creeped the leader out. "Yeah, leaving the others behind so they could rot," another said, freaking him out some more. "But there's one little thing that you didn't think about," the last flunky said in a voice that scared the leader even more than the other 2 combined. "Why yeah? Well, what's that?" he asked, about to lose control and soil himself like a child. All 3 of the transformed clones looked towards one another before pointing at something behind him. "Right behind you," they said in unison, causing the leader to spin around to see Naruto, who had just dropped his genjutsu and pounced like a panther and landing a solid blow to his face, knocking the leader out. The hostages, seeing this man knock out the man who ordered the men who held them hostage around, became restless, hoping he would let them go. The one-eyed, white-haired girl was silently impressed with the methodical way he had subdued the situation, and decided to study him in the future as he had piqued her interest. Everyone waited for what he would do next. Get rid of the transformation and gather the other men who are knocked out and pile them up, and then tie this one. He indicated the leader with a light kick to the body before him, and string him up. "I'll take care of the rest," he finished. "Yes sir," the clones said before they unhanged back into copies of the man standing before the hostages. After that, the clones moved off to take care of their assignments, quickly collecting and piling the unconscious thugs up and moving on to string the leader up. When they were done, one walked up to its creator and handed him something which he placed into his coat. "Okay, now that that's been taken care of, release the hostages while I make sure these guys don't escape, and afterwards disperse," he said while the clones nodded in affirmative. Reaching into his coat, he took out 3 shuriken and threw them so that they formed a triangle around the pile of criminals. He then performed several hand seals before declaring, Raiden, Kaminari Shibari, lightning release, thunder binding, creating a triangular prison of transparent blue walls made of lightning chakra. By the time he was finished, the hostages were free and were now openly staring at him. Narrowing his eyes at them, he said in a cold voice, "Well, are you just going to stand there all day or what?" Which snapped the people out of their trance and they started running towards the exit. All except one white-haired girl. The girl walked up to the man putting on an air of timidity, all the while studying her hero as it were, with a cold calculating mind. "Thank you for saving us," she said to him timidly, as she continued to study him and her eye fell upon the sword he carried. Who knows what would have happened if things continued. Naruto knew it was an act but decided to play along. Scratching his head like he used to when he was younger, he looked at her kindly while studying her as well. She had the build and body language of a highly trained combatant and tactician. "No problem, now go on. You don't want to stay here, do you?" he asked. "Of course not, so I better get going." She turned to go before she paused and turned around to face Naruto. "My name's Rose, by the way," she told him before running out the door to join the other hostages. He turned to leave when the doors to the building burst open and what resembled a special forces team came in with their sights trained on the blonde hero. Each operative looked around, seeing most the criminals who had held the people hostage for over 15 minutes piled up and surrounded by crackling transparent walls. Looking at the blonde in awe, only one voiced what they were all thinking, "Who are you?" Naruto thought about that for a moment. As far as he knew, there was no one he cared about in this place or any records of his existence, so if anybody considered revenge against him, they would have nothing to hurt him with. His old brash self would have screamed his name at the top of his lungs and started bragging about how awesome he was, but now he was a Junin for his village and was a hell of a lot smarter than he used to be. So instead of saying his name, he used his moniker from the bingo book back in the Elemental Nations. "You people can call me the Shadow Fox," he told them. He snapped his finger, dropping the imprisonment jutsu, and before the team's very eyes vanished into a swirl of blue flames, leaving them all clueless as to where he had gone. On top of a building just across the street, a pillar of blue fire appeared before it dispersed to reveal the Shadow Fox. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the Shadow Fox of Konoha, had been given that nickname after the war due to his trademark jutsu being the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu and his being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Kakashi had been the one to give him that nickname after his battle with Tobi, formerly Obito Uchiha, thinking that he would need a more intimidating moniker than the hero of Konoha. So from that day forward, he became the Shadow Fox, a hero and warrior known throughout the Elemental Nations who had defeated the greatest threat to the world. He had finished what Hashirama Senju had started with Madara Uchiha by defeating Kabuto and cancelling the Edo Tensei, and sealed the Jubi back into the Gedo Mazo, which stopped the Eye of the Moon plan that Madara had planned on once he had completed the Jubi and sealed it within himself. Even more recently, he wiped the cursed Uchiha line by killing Sasuke, ensuring he could not do any more damage than he had already caused. Turning his back on the bank, he walked off, reaching into his coat and unsealed what his clone had handed him. What he held was a rolled-up wad of green bill, which he assumed was money due to the numbers. Unrolling the money, he started counting and came up to 4,000 of whatever the currency was, wondering how he was going to make more without stealing from criminals. He then remembered the casinos he had seen all across the city and suddenly remembered one of his goals in life back in Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire, was to one day wipe out entire casinos with his wits, luck, and a sizable amount of money. He never got to do it with the influx of missions after the war, and Tsunade would most likely kill him if she ever found out he did this without her, but that wasn't important at the moment. Was it necessary to bankrupt casinos? No. Would he go ahead and do it anyway just for the heck of it? Oh yes, he would. "I can tell, this will be fun," he said with a smile, some of his old exuberance slipping into his posture. After switching back into his civvies, he walked down the streets when his other, unofficial, moniker came to mind, the anti-Tsunade of Konoha, he had been called. Walking around, he spotted a rather large casino with a neon pink archway for an entrance. For some reason, it really pissed him off. First target spotted. Objective: destroy at all costs, he said in a cold voice as he intended to bankrupt the casino with extreme prejudice. Sitting on a sandy inlet on the shore of a lake, Zatanna laid out on a towel. It was one of her better dreams since the death of her father, but she had the sense that her dream self was waiting for something. What that something was answered when Zatanna felt something wrap itself around her waist and she felt something soft yet firm latch itself onto her neck, adding a pleasurable suction. She moaned, I was wondering where you were, she said in a sultry voice. For some reason when she said his name she heard no sound, leaving her dream lover's identity a secret. Well, Tana-chan, I couldn't let all this get burned, so I went to get some sunblock, the mystery man told her, rubbing her lower back and shapely ass. And hearing him call her that made her feel like all her problems had disappeared. Anything that made her sad or angry was just gone. Feeling his hand go lower, she noticed that she wasn't wearing anything but didn't feel any embarrassment. She did, however, get hot when she felt something hot and hard, poking her ass, causing her to smile and turn over. When she saw her mystery lover, her breath hitched. It was the man she had seen at the strip today, as naked as she, and was staring at her in complete adoration. She smiled seductively before saying in a low voice, so considerate of me. Love, such consideration deserves a reward. And she wrapped her legs around his hips and pulled his face towards her in a scorching kiss. Zatanna gasped as she jolted herself awake. What the hell had that been? Just this morning she had been tired beyond belief, looking for a being from another dimension, and sees one extremely hot guy, and now she's having erotic dreams about doing it outdoors with said guy. However, that dream would give her lots of material to work with in the future. Noticing a slight dampness in her panties, she sighed to herself. She got out of her bed and made her way to her hotel bathroom. She needed a cold shower. A really cold shower. Naruto walked out of another casino, which he had bankrupted, with a satisfied smile on his face. He had done it. He had walked into that first casino and traded all the money he got off of the robbers for things called poker chips, and sat down at a table with several strange characters. One was large, wore boots and had a large hat. The other man wore a slick suit with greased up hair, not a strand out of place. They both had looked at him with predatory grins, thinking he was nothing but a small-time gambler just going off of his clothes. Naruto simply smiled kindly back at them and won the first game. Rounding his success up to beginner's luck, the two other players continued but started to feel the heat when he won 2 more games. Feeling an almost sadistic thrill, he decided to go all in, knowing what would follow. The 2 other men, deciding to take a chance to win their money back, put all their money on the line only to lose it all. After the poker game that he won, the rest of his time was a blur of his time at the slots, roulette, craps, and blackjack. When he was sure he got all of the money he could out of the casino, he went to cash all the money he won, but was intercepted by 2 large men who said that they needed a meeting with him out back. He went with them, and when they tried to threaten him in order to get the money their bosses lost on him, he told them it was impossible, kicked their asses, and left them in a dumpster. He went back in and cashed his money, ending up with almost $30 million. Seeing the girl behind him panicking at all the money that was given to him almost made him feel bad for bankrupting the casino. But he gave her $20,000, telling her that it would last her a while before he left the casino. That was 2 hours ago, and he had utterly bankrupted 3 more casinos before showing some grace and goodwill by giving some of the employees a little money and leaving. Yep, he was officially loaded. Naruto 4, casinos zip with the absurd amount of $120 million. After sealing up all of his money, he decided to take a break, so looking around for something to do, he spotted a billboard displaying a beautiful woman with rather large assets held back in a low-cut blouse, high-cut tights, see-through stockings, a long coat, a top hat, and carrying some kind cane. The sign said, "Come one, come all, come to see the amazing and beautiful world-class magician, Zatanna Zatara at the Circus Casino tonight at 6. Looking down at the watch, he won 2 casinos ago and read that the time was 5:30, so he decided to go. Because this casino offered some form of entertainment, he would spare it a bankrupting for now. He took a closer look at the woman. If she was half as beautiful as her picture, he wouldn't mind doing some research on her for his books. Icha Magical would be a bestseller. A young kunoichi who discovers she has magical powers and she must learn how to control with the help of her teacher, a powerful shinobi who she has always loved. Will they discover the true magic of love? All of a sudden he stopped, before he started beating himself for being a pervert. If he never got to him in life, Jiraiya most certainly got to him after his death, where in his will he had made Naruto the sole proprietor of the perverted book series. Sure, Naruto continued the series but had prided himself on not being as openly perverted as his sensei. Now what did he have? In his head he saw a chibi Jiraiya holding a banner saying, "I finally got him." Shaking that thought, he walked off trying to find the casino, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that woman. She was a beauty, he would not deny that. Maybe he should ask her to dinner? Wait, hold on. Where the hell did that come from? Walking out of her punishment shower, Zatanna looked towards her clock and saw she only had 20 minutes till show time, so she quickly used magic to change her clothes and teleported to her dressing room in the Circus Casino to prepare. For some reason, she wanted to make this her best performance ever. She didn't know why, but she was determined to make it so. "Zatanna? Oh, you're here," said the stage director. "Yep, and ready to go," she told him, heading up to the stage. Naruto arrived and paid for a ticket for the show and found a seat. At 2 minutes to showtime he started to feel a tingle of excitement that he hadn't felt in years, like he couldn't wait for this show to begin. 2 minutes could not go by fast enough for Naruto. The curtain finally rose, and for Zatanna, it couldn't have come any sooner because the feeling she felt in the dressing room increased the closer showtime came. She was more determined now than ever before for this to be the best show she had ever done before. The best start she could come up with was a flashy, flamboyant entrance. Lowering her hat she said, "Kaikal fo sevad," saying "flock of doves" backwards, and immediately hundreds of doves flew out of her hat and covered the stage. Sure that she couldn't be, she walked onto the stage and told the doves, "Otni eht ta." With the command, all of the doves flew towards the hat, and vanishing into it revealed her on the stage. Looking out over the crowd, she caught sight of the golden blonde-haired man who had infested her thoughts all day, and she paused in order to properly drink in his features. The same could be said for Naruto, who was looking in awe of probably the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. At that moment their thoughts were in sync, as they thought the same thing together. She looks better in person. In a dark room, a white-haired girl sat in front of a computer screen watching as the Shadow Fox opened the door to the stairwell, where he created 3 copies of himself which transformed into the 3 mice she had seen in the bank. She watched as he went through the stairwell and systematically taking down each of the criminals who were patrolling there. She noticed that even though he had the sword, he never once reached for it as he took them down one by one and surrounding them with some strange oriental writing before placing a single piece of paper on each before moving on. She had always been taught right from wrong by her father, but he had also taught her that if there was enough money on the table, the line between the two would disappear. Rose Wilson had been taught that anything was a weapon and should be used to kill those who trespassed against her without mercy. To be merciless was the legacy that Slade Wilson, also known as Deathstroke or the Terminator, left his children, no matter how that legacy had killed his own son or how his own high standards had made him abandon his daughter who had cut out her own eye in an attempt to gain his attention and respect. Rubbing her missing eye, she couldn't help but think that it had all been a waste of time. Her father had disappeared for years, not even bothering to contact her, and suddenly reappeared to conveniently save her from his murderous half-brother, Wade. She thought that he had cared. He had told her she was all he had left, but as soon as she was deemed useless by him, he just left her to die. No matter what, her father could always be considered a mercenary, no allegiance to anybody, even family. After the Justice League had let her go, keeping an eye on her as a sort of probation, she had been traveling trying to find who she truly was. Nowhere she went held any answers. Meditation in China, martial arts in Taiwan, even partying in the Bahamas had told her anything, and she would constantly keep on the move to keep away from her father. If there were rumors he was in China, she would go to England. If she heard he was in England, she would go to America, and so on and so forth. She had just been about to give up on finding any answer and drown her sorrows in booze and gambling, but then he showed up. Shadow Fox swooped in and saved those people she had been with before she could start her plan that could have gotten people killed. She could be better. No, she was better than that, and she would change. She was the Ravager, the only daughter of Deathstroke, and she would separate herself from the shadow her father cast. She would become something else, something better than Slade Wilson. And she knew where to start. How long had it been since the war? A year? A century? He didn't know. All he knew was that because of that insufferable brat, the glorious plan that his master had almost carried out was ruined. The Jubi had been sealed into the statue again, and he had taken his Rinnegan from him. He remembered how he had been near death and the brat had changed into his full Kyuubi state to load up the Bijudama to kill him, and him using the last of his chakra to pull off his Kamui for a quick escape. Only instead for the brat to fire that infernal blast of chakra right as he was about to escape and something happened to his technique. For the longest time he was in the dark, no feeling, no sight, like he was blind, and then he was cold. Not enough to kill him, but enough to preserve his body and keep him alive but dormant and left barely aware as time passed. With nothing but his memories, he remembered how he had used the brat as a baby as leverage to get a shot at the Uzumaki bitch who held his master's pet. How he cherished the memory of his former sensei's face as was forced to choose between protecting his wife or saving his infant son. The release of the Kyuubi and the ensuing battle with his sensei had been one of the best times of his life until he had been defeated and the Kyuubi had been sealed once more. From day one the brat had been a problem, from the point where the Kyuubi had been sealed inside him, to the point that he had been placed into this hell. He swore that if he got the chance he would do what his master never let him do. He would kill Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Suddenly he felt an energy that was all too familiar to him. It seemed that he may not be close but that infernal Jinchuriki was there for him to find and kill. His one remaining eye opened, revealing a blood-red eye, with 3 tomos surrounding the pupil. In the Arctic there was an explosion of light and intense heat that came from within the ice. After all the debris had settled, an anomaly occurred where the air seemed to spiral in on itself before a man stepped out with the center of the spiral coming from his eye. The man was tall, wearing a black tattered cloak with decorative red clouds that adorned it, and wore a purple mask with 3 tomo in a circular pattern just like his red eye. Looking around he found himself standing on a glacier which seemed to have been his prison for however long he had been trapped there. Taking his moment to study his former prison, the man started to turn, seeming to look for something. Then he looked south before he started walking, only to stumble and fall. It seemed that he had been there for a long time for him to not even be able to walk properly. It mattered not though, he picked himself up and continued before he started to run, slowly at first but gaining even more speed and ignoring his screaming body. He ran a few more seconds before he disappeared into a spiral and appeared miles away before repeating the process again, and again, and again. Only one thing was clear. Obito Uchiha was back and he was out for blood. Naruto was glued to his seat in the casino, completely astounded by the show that Zatanna was performing. It was truly astounding to see what the buxom woman from the billboard in the city was capable of. He was impressed with her entrance. How she got all those doves to go into her hat and just vanish he had no idea, but that had only been the beginning. She levitated objects, cut people in half and put them back together, and somehow performed a spectacular fireworks ensemble in the building without starting a fire. All without lifting a finger, just by saying a few strange words, which halfway through he realized was her saying what she wanted to happen backwards. This woman was hot, in more ways than one. Seriously, as he was thinking that she had set herself on fire. This totally beat the circus he had seen back in Tsuki no Kuni, Land of Moon, with Michiru and Hikaru when he was guarding them with Kakashi, Lee, and Sakura. Of course that was before everything went to hell and they ended up saving an entire country from a coup d'etat from a greedy asshole who wanted more than he was already given in life. Exciting life, meet new people, be praised and worshipped as a hero for bringing back people's courage or inspiring others to do something for themselves. He really loved being a ninja. Noticing a scratching sound, he looked around before seeing a small notebook in his hands with him writing things down in it. He looked closer at what he wrote and found that he was writing possible ideas for Icha Magical. When had he pulled out his notebook? Wait, when had he even had a notebook? This was not good and he did the only thing he could. I am not a pervert. I am not a pervert. I am not a pervert. Damn it, Jiraiya really had gotten to him. He looked down to see he was scribbling again. Tonight, after he found a hotel, he was going to spend several hours meditating just trying to rediscover his self-worth. Up on the stage, after putting herself out, Zatanna ended her performance. Most of it she had put all that desire for a great show into her efforts and ended up performing one of the best shows of her performing career. She had, of course, snuck a few glances out into the audience and she sought out the blonde god one more time before she left. Seeing him, she could clearly see that he looked like he was ashamed of himself. Of what, she was not sure, but with that depressed look on his face it was easy to tell he was upset. Feeling out his emotions to try and figure out what was bothering him, she was surprised when she felt the energy that she had been tracking that morning coming directly from him. Well, that took care of her night. Now what was she going to do? Calling over a security personnel she said, "You see the tall blonde over there? About 6'3"? Yes ma'am, would you like me to hold him in custody and call the police?" He asked her after spotting said blonde. She turned and walked away while responding to his question, "No. I would like for you to go over and tell him I would like to meet him in my dressing room," she said, never once turning around. The guard, as confused as he was, didn't try to question the beautiful woman's request. He just shrugged his shoulders and did as he was told. That was the fundamentals of security. Look out for trouble and do as you're told to. It was simple, and he liked simple. Naruto, getting over his fit of depressed perversion, realized that the show had ended and the audience was leaving. Getting up and stretching his back, he was about to leave when he noticed one of the security personnel heading his way. That didn't make any sense, he hadn't even started his winning. And everyone knows with Naruto it's definitely not gambling. As the guard made his way over to Naruto, Naruto's body was tense, ready to spring at the slightest sign of aggression. He was expecting violence, he was expecting to be asked to come out back for a small chat, like the last few times he had entered a casino. He did not, however, expect for the guard to smile at him slightly and say, "Sir, can you follow me backstage? Ms. Zatanna would like to meet you in her dressing room." That was quite unexpected. Not sure how to react, he gave an eloquent answer, sure. I wonder what she wants," his tenant wondered aloud inside his head. "I wish I knew, but how much you want to bet Murphy's Law is about to make a comeback?" he asked Kurama. He did not get an answer because only very loud laughing was heard on his end. Kurama may have been a smokin' hot vixen, but at her very core, she was still a fox. Making their way behind the stage, they reached a door that had the initials ZZ labeled onto it. "Be sure to knock," the guard warned. The last time she performed here a guy thought he'd sneak a peek on her, and as soon as he opened the door he got a kick to the jewels. I think he's still singing soprano in the boys' choir in the chapel on the other side of town. Naruto, for a moment, almost cupped his groin out of sympathy but stopped himself by telling the guard, "I've heard of worse things." "Oh, really?" The guard wondered amusedly. "How and when?" "When I was 18, I and a snake charmer lady I knew were having a little fun in a department store dressing room. He told the man, while we were at it, some pervert decided to get his jollies off, and she had a snake she had trained to attack on command." Hearing this, the guard went white, gripping his own crotch. "Let's just say Anko gave that guy the worst case of blue balls I have ever seen," Naruto finished while he reached to knock on the door. "Good to know," the guard said in a strangled voice, just trying to not to imagine having a poisonous snake bite him in his own man bits before turning and walking away. "Well, see ya," he said over his shoulder. Smirking at one-upping the guy, Naruto was about to knock when he heard, wait. Hold on a second, this guy did what?" He lowered his hand thinking that maybe he should wait a little longer. Black was one way to describe his taste in clothes. Wearing black body armor with a bat-shaped insignia on the chest, along with a cowl over his head which attached to a long flowing cape that wrapped around him to hide most of his body, was a well-built man somewhere in his mid-40s. This was the legendary Caped Crusader, the Dark Knight of Gotham City. This was Batman. "Zatanna, you shouldn't just answer when you're not in uniform," he said to her in his monotone voice. Really, this guy never let his emotions out when on duty. Years ago she would have made some witty comment about how he was basically a robot, but with years of working with the man came a sense of apathy when interacting with him, when he felt like saying more than a few words, and not to mention the fact that she wanted to cause him bodily harm at that very moment. She was even more frustrated by the fact he was reprimanding her for that little tidbit. "Why? It's not like my identity is a secret. I mean, really, my hero name is my actual name. It's not like there's anybody for any enemies I might make to harm," she said a bit sadly, but it was true. Her father was dead and she had no other living relatives. That she knew of anyway. Be that as it may, you would be surprised what a simple change in attire or hairstyle can do to hide who you are. All it takes is something simple. Robin wears a small domino mask and no one recognizes him. He said. Was he serious? It was impossible to tell when this guy was joking or not. She would guess that he was serious because Batman never made a joke. Yeah, okay, I understand. So what do you need? She asked, annoyed but curious as to what the man wanted now that her tension was finally going away. Earlier today there was a bank robbery. He started but Zatanna cut him off. Sorry, I wasn't able to stop it. I was resting for the day. She may have been tired for not getting any sleep in more than 24 hours that day, but in the end she was a hero and heroes don't let that kind of stuff happen. She kicked herself for the situation and waited to be reprimanded by her superior. They didn't get away, Batman stated flatly. While they were surrounded by tactical assault teams, they took hostages. The police tried to talk them down with little success, but during negotiations the team that took over was systematically taken down and captured. Batman informed her, and making her wonder which of her other fellow heroes were in Vegas. As far as she knew, she was the only one here currently. Who took them down? I think I'm the only one in the city, Zatanna questioned the Caped Crusader. If it was someone new, well, it wasn't every day that a new hero showed up nowadays. She may have been one of the newer heroes in the League, but she had been in the game for more than 3 years before the League had even been formed by the Founding Seven. From what I can tell, the one who stopped the robbery was a new hero who just showed up today out of nowhere, in Las Vegas, calling himself Shadow Fox. After receiving the report from Oracle, I went over some satellite imagery over the last day and a half. It seems there was a temporal disturbance in the early hours this morning, after which it just disappeared. The man reported trying to give Zatanna necessary information so she could find the new hero before he got in over his head. Zatanna had a very good idea of who Batman was talking about and asked, "You wouldn't happen to have an image of Shadow Fox, would you?" Hoping to get an answer she liked. Yes, this was taken before he disappeared in, and I quote, a torrent of swirling blue fire. After saying that, an image popped up beside the hologram. It depicted a man in a long red coat with black flames at the hem, black and white armor, and carrying a katana on his back. She also noticed his unruly blonde hair with a strap of cloth holding his bangs back that seemed to have a piece of metal with some sort of image engraved on it, and a long orange scarf covering the bottom half of his face. Over to the side, a pile of robbers were surrounded by 3 walls comprised of some kind of blue energy. Zatanna swore she recognized the man from somewhere, but she just could not remember from where. Interesting, could you zoom in and enhance the image on that metal plate on his head? There seems to be something engraved there, she said. Batman did as requested, and when the image was back, Zatanna knew instantly why this Shadow Fox had seemed familiar to her. The symbol that was carved into the metal plate on his head was the same spiral leaf design she had seen on the shirt worn by the man she had been fantasizing about all day, and just minutes before had been about to. No, bad Zatanna. Moving back to her original train of thought, his blonde hair matched up with the man's and they seemed to be of the same height and build. And now that she thought about it, he was about to come to her room. You wanted me to find him? She asked. Yes, I would also like you to find this man as well, Batman said as he brought up a new image that showed an image of the man from the previous photo, only without his disguise and in more casual clothing. I believe they are one and the same. Yeah, no need to worry. I was going to track him down after the show. Turns out, this guy has piqued the good doctor's interest, which made him ask me to find this guy, Zatanna confirmed, then asked, what did he do to catch your interest anyway? Out of costume, I mean. About 4 hours after the robbery, several casinos were bankrupted. And this guy was at every one of them and won almost every game he played. I ran his picture through a facial recognition system and there's nothing on him, the Dark Knight told her. Zatanna had stopped listening when she heard that not one, not a couple but several casinos had been bankrupted. After that, sifted through the rest of what he said, sank in, and responded, wait. Hold on a second, this guy did what? She screamed. Like I said, I reviewed security footage from the casinos showing that he won all of the games he played. In all honesty, it was disturbing, the Batman relayed to the shocked woman. Really, he couldn't blame her for being stunned. It wasn't every day you're told that some guy just bankrupted a bunch of casinos. Anyway, I want you to find him so that we can find his motives. But another reason is because with no matches for facial recognition software we will need to learn his identity the old way. Sighing to herself, she was ready to end the transmission saying, "Understood. I'll get back to you after I've gotten this guy to Dr. Fate. You can work on finding his identity after that if he has one here." Hearing that, Batman's eyes narrowed. Even though Zatanna didn't say it, he knew that the man had to have come from another dimension. That would explain why Fate was interested and why there wasn't a match in any of the databases he had access to for this man. As far as he could tell, Shadow Fox had no ill will towards humanity, but he wouldn't just assume he was on their side. The last he had taken anyone at face value, the world had almost been taken over by the Thanagarian race. Even if Fate found nothing wrong, he would still question the blonde male himself before he made any assumptions. Very well, Batman out, and with that, the Dark Knight ended communication. Sighing once more, Zatanna stood up and stretched before magically extending her senses to see if there was anybody near her room. Getting her feedback, she felt the presence of who she presumed to be this Shadow Fox, standing right outside her door. He must have heard her scream out when Batman told her about the bankrupted casinos and stayed outside to wait for the all clear. Strange, it was like he had been in the same situation before and had ignored common sense and went in anyway. She would have opened the door in the case of a normal person, but if he really did feel similar to Trigon, it was better to be safe than sorry and have some kind of plan. The plan she came up with was simple enough. Let him in, close the door and restrain him as quickly as possible. Yep, she may have been flamboyant and all that jazz, but sometimes it really was the simple things that worked the best. Walking up to the door, she put on her best smile and did a once-over of herself to make sure she liked what she was wearing. She may have been meeting a possible harbinger to the end of the world, but she was still a woman, and all women were allowed to be just a little vain about what they wore, especially when said harbinger was a hot-as-sin male that she would let rock. Damn it all. Do I have to start carrying a spray bottle around with me? However, those thoughts could wait. For now, she had a certain otherworldly entity to interrogate. Walking over to the door, she opened the door to see the handsome blonde with whiskers with his back turned waiting for the door to open. When he heard the door open, he turned around to greet his host. When they caught sight of each other face to face, there was a pause from each as they eyed each other like pieces of meat. To Zatanna, he looked even better than he had when he was watching her show. He was 5 or 6 inches taller than she was with tan skin and was in the t-shirt and pants she had seen him in while she was flying over the city. His hair seemed to absorb the light in the room and form some kind of aura around it, which went nicely with his glowing ocean blue eyes with his whisker-like birthmarks, making him seem cute yet feral at the same time. With Naruto, she was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen in his life. Off the stage, she wore a white corset top that showed off the top of her ample bosom and stuck to her body like a second skin showing of her thin waist, along with an almost knee-length black skirt with a split on the side that went halfway up her thighs, with the tightness above the split showcasing her wide hips and attractively round ass. Her skin was smooth and pale, contrasting nicely with her hair and complementing her dark eyes. One thing that they both noticed was the lust in their eyes that they didn't try to hide. Neither was embarrassed, nor were they blushing from thinking one another were attractive. They stood there for 30 seconds sizing each other up, and from the looks on their faces were about to pounce on each other and start an intense make-out session. Luckily, both had excellent self-restraint. Especially Naruto, who had learned better self-control after his sage training with the elder toads of Mount Myoboku after the war had ended. Zatanna broke the lustful staring contest with a beautiful smile as she moved aside. "Would you like to come in?" she said in a low seductive hum. Just because she was about to interrogate him didn't mean she couldn't make a gesture that she liked what she saw. And if the tightening she noticed in his pants was any indicator, he appreciated what he saw as well. Smiling, he replied to her question. "Of course, beautiful," he said, causing just a small dust of pink to cover her face because of his compliment adding to her beauty. He saw her take a step back and turn around, saying, "Well, come in," and close the door. While he did just that, he was so caught up in meeting such a beautiful woman that he failed to notice that he forgot to leave a Hiraishin, Flying Thunder God, marker for quick escapes. That was a mistake that would cost him. Zatanna had a smile on her face because she felt his eyes on her and enjoyed the effect she was having on this gorgeous blonde. So much so she added an exaggerated sway to her hips and turning her head to show that she knew he was staring at her well-developed posterior and smirked at him to let him know she enjoyed it. She knew she had to restrain him fast or this would turn into a very, very heated meeting. However, all good things must come to an end, pity. Lifting her hand, she raised a finger and wagged it towards her in a "come here" gesture, giving a smile for added effect. And it worked like a charm. Giving a foxy smile of his own, that almost made her legs give out and made a warm and wet tingling sensation appear at the junction of her thighs, he moved forward. When he got to her, they stared at each other just a little bit longer before Naruto wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her luscious body against his. The contact the two of them had caused the room's temperature to go up a bit and her breathing went from a steady in and out to light pants of arousal. Him just being near her like this really turned her on. Naruto's face closed in on Zatanna's full, pink lips to give her a hot kiss that would be unmatched now or ever. In the back of his mind he was wondering why it was this easy to get this close to a woman. Sure, he saw the lust in her eyes when she opened the door and he usually had better self-control and he was pretty sure she did too. Hell, even Anko hadn't been this easy to seduce. Of course, that had, somehow, been accomplished during his brief stint in the T&I department when he had shown just what he could do with a string, a feather, and a stick of butter. However, that wasn't the point when he heard his old sensei Kakashi's philosophy, to look underneath the underneath, and his gut telling him something wasn't right. That suspicion was confirmed when right before their lips met she mumbled under her breath, "Shrewd KCOL." Immediately he heard a clicking sound behind him, signifying the door was locked, and before he could do anything else he heard her mumble again so softly he could barely hear it, "Niartser eht nam." And out of the walls, objects flew out wrapping themselves around him. Everything from chains to ropes flew out and wrapped him up. There was even some sticky silver plastic substance that looked similar to tape but looked much stronger, and you all know what I'm talking about. When the flying objects settled down and receded back into the walls and under the furniture, Naruto was revealed to be tied up to the bed her dressing room was provided with, in some weird shibari position that he and Anko had tried out once, except it had been Anko who was tied to the bed. With a seductive and predatorily gaze, Zatanna walked up with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, but this is necessary until I get some answers." She waited for him to say something but he stayed quiet. Soon, very soon, he would be able to take his revenge and kill the last of the Uzumaki. This time there would be no army of ninja willing to sacrifice themselves to ensure the survival of the Uzumaki scum. It would just be the two of them, and just like the last time they fought one-on-one, Obito would crush his spirit and when he was sure he had taken everything dear to the brat that would be when he killed him. But for now, he was tired and hungry. He would rest for a while and find something to eat, and then he would head down into that city and draw out that infernal Jinchuriki. Taking out one of the few kunai he had, he flung the small knife behind him giving a satisfied smirk when he heard a pained hiss from the snake he had just killed for dinner. He had never liked snakes much because they reminded him of that fool Orochimaru. Turning his back on the city, he walked over to the snake and picked it up and began to skin it for dinner. While he sat down he wondered what he could use to start a fire to cook the snake. His thoughts, however, were interrupted when he heard a scream. Looking around, he saw the edge of the cliff where he was sure the scream had come from. He walked over and looked down. Hanging there was a man who was barely holding onto a jutting rock and looked as if he was about to lose his grip. Looking down at him, Obito reached down and grabbed his wrist and pulled him up. When the man was sure that he was safe he started talking in an unfamiliar language that Obito didn't understand. Opting to stay quiet, the cloaked man gestured for the hiker to take a seat across from him. When they were both seated, the man started talking again in that strange language hoping to get a response out of the strange man who had rescued him. When Obito looked up at him and smiled pleasantly he suddenly felt like he was in danger. Across from him Obito discreetly took in a deep breath of air and converted it into fire chakra, and when he saw the hiker starting to get twitchy his smile turned from pleasant to predatorial. Before the man could even react he was covered in white-hot flames and started to scream in absolute agony, but pretty soon he stopped screaming and moving altogether. He was dead. Not once had Obito stopped skinning the snake from when he sat back down to setting the hiker on fire. Finished skinning the snake, he looked around and saw a stick a little distance away. Grabbing it, he stuck the skinned snake onto it and placed the stuck snake over the fire. He had just solved his fire dilemma. She wanted to meet him. Meet the one who had kept her from falling into despair and given her existence a new meaning. If there was anyone who could guide her on her new path, it would be him and no one else. But now was not the time. It would be a while yet until they met face to face. A while before she was sure she could truly say that she was no longer her father's disciple. And until then she would retrain herself. Shadow Fox had taken care of each of the criminals who had taken those people hostage in the bank without even taking out his sword once. He hadn't killed them or maimed them. He just knocked each one out and restrained them without a fuss. That was the part of her that she needed to erase, her killer instinct. Even if she couldn't erase it completely, she could still restrain it. Even when she had been living with her foster family before her father had saved her, she had always managed to retain that part of her that was a killer, and if she was able to erase that part her father had created, she would be able to make real progress in her goal to be better than she was before. Be better. Every time that thought crossed her mind, she went back to that bank and reanalyzed what she had been about to do in that bank. The plan, if she hadn't seen those mice, would have killed several people, left her with possibly lethal injuries, and left her with even more blood on her hands. And if she hadn't been killed from that, she would have taken all the money she had, spent half of it on booze, the other half gambling, and eventually end up dead on the street, or only to most likely end up back under her father's, no Deathstroke's control again. If the man didn't want her and would only throw her away if he deemed her useless, he didn't deserve to be called her father. Even if she did manage to succeed in rehabilitating herself from Deathstroke's teachings, she would always be regarded with distrust and open hostility. But that was the point of changing oneself. It wasn't easy and would take time. But, in the end, if you wanted something, it would take time and work. She rubbed her missing right eye again and sighed. How she wished she could take back that mistake, but there was no turning back time, and no transplant surgeries for such a thing. What a waste for something that had been impossible from the beginning. Walking over to her computer, she brought up the image of Shadow Fox that she had found on the security footage and studied him. His armor, his weapons, and his body, she took it all in. Every detail went down in her mind. Being trained to hide her emotions all her life, she was shocked when she looked away and saw her reflection. Her face was red, and her breathing heavy, and a warm wet feeling in between her legs. Whatever she saw in the hero on the screen, it was obviously more than a road to redemption. Not yet, but soon, really soon she would see him. So let me get this straight. You are Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, and you're a ninja who has been involved in life and death struggles against someone you once considered a brother? Zatanna asked the man who was bound to her bed with everything she could think of, including duct tape. Receiving a nod, she continued with her questions. Your brand of ninja has an internal energy reservoir called chakra that allows you to control the main elements, which ones depending on your natural affinity, along with sub-elements combining two or more elements such as lava or ice due to genetic mutations in certain families or groups, she queried. Another nod. These mutations are called Kekkei Genkei or bloodline limits and expand farther than control of sub-elements and take up more genetic traits like in the eyes or making the body more animalistic or allowing countless insects to convert the human body into a living hive. And there are even more diverse and quite plainly, creepy, abilities from 4 other major military forces and countless other minor countries? She continued on, nodding again. Naruto thought he heard an annoying jingle in his head that made him want to smash his head against the wall. Think Jeopardy! You come from one of the major powers on your continent known as Konoha and somehow arrived here after you and a traitor launched your most powerful attacks at each other, resulting in some kind of crack appearing in the air that sucked you in while you were too tired to resist? She finished off, feeling proud for summarizing all the information he had given her when she had him tied up. And again a nod. Now with the necessary information gathered, it was on to more important matters, and you came into ownership of an adult novel series after your master and godfather was killed by a former student when you were 16, and it was demanded that you continue the series where you were even more successful than the previous author even without the perverted tendencies. She questioned in a stoic voice, giving no hint as to whether she was angry or not. And the reason you looked depressed in the audience after my show was because you were writing ideas down for the next installation into the series, which, if I'm translating this right, means make out, magical addition, which has never happened before. She finished. Scared for his life, Naruto only nodded, resigned to his fate of an early grave. Walking up to her captive, Zatanna, who still had on her stoic face, bent down so as to be face to face with the novelist. When he was sure she was going to kill him in the most brutal fashion only reserved for perverts, She smiled seductively at him, leaning in even closer before whispering into his ear. "Well, I guess I'll have to give you some decent material then, won't I?" And licked the whisker mark on his left cheek to tease him for a little fun. But she did not expect to hear a rumble from his throat that, to her, sounded almost like purring. Pulling away, she looked at the man in wonder, while Naruto looked away in mortification, before she gave a high-pitched womanly squeal of, "So cute." After which she grabbed his head and crammed it into her ample bosom and almost giving Naruto a giant nosebleed. The simple fact that he didn't have a nosebleed was quite impressive, considering the fact that not only was this woman hot who had a chest and amazing ass that could rival Tsunade in her prime, but if she wasn't kidding was willing to flaunt it for him for the book. This woman was amazing. He was starting to imagine the woman posing for his research and saw stars, and when he dismissed the image for some reason he still saw stars. He then realized how long the woman had held his face in her chest and was starting to suffer from oxygen deprivation. He started to struggle, but he being tied up stopped him, not that the woman could tell. As he started to black out, he came to the realization that there were worse ways to go. Jiraiya would be proud. As he was about to fall into the peaceful blackness of unconsciousness, he was released from the woman's vice grip, and falling back to the bed, gulped down as much life-giving oxygen as he possibly could. Looking down at the man she had almost smothered with her large assets, she couldn't help but kind of feel a little embarrassed at losing control of herself for that brief moment, and also quite pleased with the blush she saw on the man's face along with the small nosebleed. To be completely honest, she had enjoyed having the ninja's face in her corset-covered cleavage because of the pleasurable tingles she felt in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, if he played his cards right, she would make good on her promise to give him some material for that book of his. When that thought crossed her mind, she saw a brief flash of him and her on the beach from the dream she had had just before she woke up. She smiled when the image passed. It really was a good dream, or it would have been if she hadn't woken up, damn it. Moving on from that erotic train of thought, she figured that he was telling the truth about his situation. It was all too elaborate for him to just make it up on the spot. Plus, seeing him tied to her bed was giving her some pretty perverted ideas. And she did all the work. She figured fate should be the one to ask him about the demonic presence lingering around him, of which she was sure wasn't his. He seemed too nice. But thinking back to the Thanagarian invasion almost 2 years ago, she figured it was best not to take anyone with demonic energy or secrets at face value. Shayera Hole or Hawkgirl was one of her best friends, and Zatanna was one of the few heroines in the league that would consider even being seen with her in public after what she did, considering all the hostility or lack of acknowledgement for her achievements. For some reason this Naruto seemed to remind her of her winged friend. Coming out of her thoughts, she saw that Naruto's breathing was becoming steadier and more controlled, showing that he was no longer suffering from lack of oxygen. Clearing her throat, she said, "Well, there's someone who wants to meet you, so sailor me." And as soon as she said those words, the bonds that held Naruto to the bed unraveled themselves and disappeared into the walls and under the furniture. "Thanks," he said in a raw, quiet voice. Not that she could blame him. He had almost died from being smothered by a large set of S, which was almost every pervert's life goal. Walking over to his side, Zatanna gently grabbed his arm and helped him up. When she was sure he was steady enough, she said, "Come on, there's someone who wants to meet you, Mr. Uzumaki. He just wants to ask you a few questions about the circumstances of your arrival here. Would you be fine with that?" Looking at the woman who had almost seduced him, tied him up, and nearly smothered him with her chest, Naruto decided it would be best for him to proceed with caution, as he didn't want to repeat that whole process over again. Or maybe he did. The possibilities could be quite pleasurable. Damn it, what happened to him? He had never felt this perverted. Sure, I don't mind," he replied to the busty magician, "and by the way, just call me Naruto, I hate formalities." Zatanna ran his name through her head, translating it. When she finished, she just busted out laughing. Why she was laughing was pretty obvious to the blonde, he just needed confirmation. "Seriously? Your name is Fishcake?" she gasped out, confirming his thoughts. Knowing what she was thinking, however, didn't keep the tick mark from appearing on his head. "If you must know, it means maelstrom, not fishcake," he corrected her in an even voice, and aside from the tick mark, his face barely showed his annoyance at the common mistranslation of his name. It was strange how he had taken most of his loudmouth tendencies out of his personality, yet he was still bothered by someone pointing out his name's other meaning. With that, Zatanna stopped laughing. Sure, she could have continued, but she needed to do something first. Right. Of course, I could just call you Shadow Fox if you don't mind. When he heard her call him by his title, Naruto's whole body stiffened. How had she known it had been him? He wasn't wearing his headband now or any article of clothing that held the leaf insignia of his village, so how did she figure it out? Watching his reaction, Zatanna was unsurprised to see his reaction to her calling him out on being the hero that stopped the bank robbery that had occurred earlier that day. Unlike her, most heroes had families or loved ones that they protected from their enemies through the use of secret identities, only letting a select few in on their secrets or if their friends inadvertently found out. But if Naruto's story was true, then why did he hide his identity from the world if he wasn't even from it? How did you figure it out? Naruto asked in an even voice. There was no use in denying it anyway. He would have if she had simply demanded he reveal himself as the Shadow Fox. But she had said it in passing, like someone would if they were already aware of the fact. Come now, you didn't think you were the only one who put on a costume and fought crime, did you? She inquired playfully. The look on the blonde's face let her know that she hit the nail on the head with her comment, but it was to be expected as she was forced to remind herself that he was from a different dimension. Plus, one of my good, is friends the right word for him? Just so happens to be the world's greatest detective, and he's the one who connected the hero that just appeared earlier today to an obscenely lucky gambler who has no records on him. Naruto cringed at that explanation. Perhaps bankrupting 4 casinos within the span of 4 hours wasn't the best of ideas when trying to be incognito. On to more important matters, grab my hand and I'll take you to where we'll meet the good doctor. She told him as she reached a slender hand out for him to grasp. Naruto looked at the hand with a calculative expression, weighing his options in his mind. On one hand, he could take the woman's offer to meet someone who just might have some sort of clue as to how the hell he had ended up in a completely different dimension after his farce of a battle against the last Uchiha. On the other, he could turn around and run for the door and try to get as far as he could without the use of his Hiraishin markers, leading to a wide-scale pursuit that would probably end up with lots of collateral damage and him just being caught and forced to meet the guy she was talking about anyway. Sighing, Naruto went with the least painful option and grabbed the woman by the waist, much to her surprise, and leaned in to whisper, "I'll let you know, I like to travel in style." But unfortunately they needed to be somewhere soon, so separating herself from the tall blonde she grabbed his arm, teleported them to her hotel room where as soon as they appeared Dr. Fate appeared as well. For Naruto, instantaneous travel between one place to another was not as troublesome as some might think, as Zatanna's teleportation was not dissimilar to his Hiraishin. The fact that he wasn't on the ground either puking everything he had eaten recently or simply trying to catch his breath surprised Zatanna. Figuring she could get the answer about why he didn't have the normal reaction to instantaneous travel during his interrogation from Fate, she opted to remain silent. Looking around, Naruto instantly spotted the man in the golden face mask, boots, gloves and cape, all over a skin-tight blue outfit almost instantly. It was a very strange sight to him that had him fighting down his loudmouth reaction of pointing at the man and screaming out, "Oh, what the hell are you?" at the man. He just stared at the strange man for a few seconds before turning to Zatanna and saying, "I see what you mean about the costumes now." Before she could respond to the blonde's comment, the good doctor decided to speak his part. "Welcome, young warrior. You have traveled a great distance in order to be present here," Dr. Fate said to the shinobi. "But aside from your timely arrival, I am most curious about the energy that I feel radiating off of you." The Lord of Order continued. "As charming as it is to meet you, why don't we introduce ourselves properly before we start this inquiry, I would assume?" Naruto inquired in a calm, calculating voice, perfect for a ninja who had to keep a cool head if he wanted to survive. He wasn't going to leap before he looked or let his emotions control him. It was things like that that made him go berserk when he was faced against Orochimaru back on Tenchi Bridge. That manipulative snake had known just how to push Naruto's buttons, causing him to go berserk and made him nearly kill Sakura back then. It was ironic how the person for whom he pushed to better himself was the very same one to take his teammate and good friend's life, was the one that not even 2 days ago he had killed. The Lord of Order looked at the blonde shinobi in front of him in scrutiny before he relented to Naruto's suggestion. Bowing slightly at the waist and introduced himself, "Very well. I am Dr. Fate, the Lord of Order of this universe and one of the members of the Justice League," he said, stating his alias and position. Hearing the terms, Lord of Order, and Justice League, confused Naruto, but he held his tongue figuring he'd get answers to what they were in the conversation to come. Mimicking the doctor's actions he bent at the waist. My name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the Shadow Fox of Konoha, the last member and heir of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. Jonin of the Konoha Shinobi Corps. He said, giving just a little bit more information than Dr. Fate had. So shall we have a seat? It is my belief that this conversation we are about to have will be a rather lengthy one. He told them while gesturing to the pair of couches that faced each other with an ornate coffee table between them. Following the man's suggestion, Naruto walked over to one of the couches and sat down in one of them, and Fate taking the one opposite of him along with Zatanna, internally frowning at how soft and giving the piece of furniture was, that would slow his reaction down a bit in the case of a surprise attack. On the coffee table, a large plate of cookies appeared in the middle, making Naruto stare at the treats in confusion. Please, have a cookie, my wife made them earlier. The doctor offered to the confused blonde. Not wanting to seem rude to the man in front of him, he reached out and grabbed the cookie. For some strange reason now, when he looked at the man in blue and gold armor, he saw an image of the Sarutobi Oji-san overlapping with the figure of the man in front of him. For some reason the man gave off the same vibe that the old Hokage had given whenever Naruto had been brought to his office. Realizing that he was starting to stare, Naruto took the cookie he had in his hand and brought it to his mouth, eating the treat at a reserved pace, despite how delicious it was. This is very good. Your wife is quite well versed in baking, I would think. Naruto said. Yes, she is. But I believe we start with the real reason for our meeting, Shadow Fox. Dr. Fate replied, referring to him with his code name rather than his real name. Your actions today were quite remarkable, saving all the civilians using stealth and cunning rather than rash theatrics like most with powers would have. Quite the impressive debut for a hero. The doctor continued. Hearing the part about the debut, Naruto decided to ask one of his questions. Exactly how many of these heroes are there, if you're able to talk about this like it happens every other week? Naruto asked the good doctor. Instead of Dr. Fate answering his question, Zatanna just started laughing as if he had just told her the funniest joke she had ever heard. When the two sitting men looked at the woman, she calmed down as best she could and tried to point out what Naruto had said that was so funny. Well, not every other week but almost every year 2 or more new heroes take up the good fight along with a load of new crazies. Zatanna explained, getting a confused look from the blonde. What Zatanna means is that it is not uncommon for heroes to reveal themselves in an act of great heroism, and more often than not the arrival of said hero inspires an adversary of the hero to appear with a diabolical plot. Fate explained the gorgeous woman's comment before continuing, and to answer your question, the Justice League has enough heroes to be comparable to a large army. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that. From what he had heard, these were rather unique individuals with diverse powers, almost like Kekkei Genkai, but only limited to one person and not an entire family or group like his home. If I were to take in this lovely lady's words into account, I'd be willing to bet there are way more of your enemies than there are heroes, and they are willing to band together to try and take you guys down, or forces that just a few weren't able to handle alone, so you all had to band together just so that there wouldn't be any obscene amounts of casualties, creating this Justice League. Naruto said, letting out a casual observation while discreetly flirting with the lovely magician across from him, causing her to flush, which Dr. Fate either didn't notice or chose to ignore. Essentially, so would you mind explaining how or why you are here? Dr. Fate inquired to the blonde ninja. Naruto figured that he wasn't about to be interrogated in obscenely painful ways, decided to give the truth anyway, so like Zatanna he told Dr. Fate essential information about his kind. He told the man about how he had arrived, chakra and the ways it was utilized in and out battle, ninja and the wars that had been fought between the nations, the founding of the 5 great villages, bloodlines, abilities, and the leaders of the villages and their titles as the 5 shadows. He left out various things like the 10 biju or how they were contained, or the fact that there was a living, breathing demon within the same room as them. Of course, as he was finishing that thought, a few seconds after he finished with his explanation about his home, Fate asked, one more thing. Would you mind explaining to me how you are literally bathed in demonic energy? As soon as the question was asked, Naruto tensed up, ready to spring at the slightest sign of aggression. He may have been loved as a hero, as he was meant to be, back in Konoha, but years of constant beatings, neglect, and abuse had created a reaction to anybody he didn't absolutely trust asking about the demon sealed away inside of him. He was almost ready to get away as fast as possible, but was stopped when he felt a smaller reassuring hand gently grip his hand gently yet firmly. Looking up he saw Zatanna staring down at their hands seemingly confused and absolutely flustered that she had reached out and grasped the hand of a complete stranger who she had only been in the company of for about an hour. Sighing internally, he decided to give them some but not all of the information involving his status. When I was a child, a great beast known as the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked my home village. It simply appeared in the middle of the village out of nowhere and started attacking and killing ninja and civilians alike. The fox ended up killing or permanently maiming about half of our ninja forces before the leader of my village at the time, the Yondaime Hokage, arrived and teleported it to a safer venue where he went through a sealing ritual that would seal the beast away into a vessel. The vessel of a beast like the Kyuubi not only had to have an extremely durable body but had to be a young child. You see, like you said, the beast gave off so much demonic energy that it was literally too toxic for the beast to be sealed into an adult, but with a child, their chakra circulatory system is not yet fully developed, allowing for them to be able to take in the energy that the demon gives off. So using his own child, the Hokage sealed the great Kyuubi no Kitsune into its newest jailer, me. Naruto finished explaining how he had so much demonic energy but decided to continue omitting tales of his abuse. After it was sealed into me, I became something known as a Jinchuriki, a human sacrifice, living weapon, and all for the price of my parents sacrificing their lives to the Shinigami to make my seal work. I'll simply say that being a Jinchuriki is not easy. But I later found out that the fox didn't just decide to attack one day. Somebody named Obito snuck into my village and tracked down where my mother Kushina Uzumaki was giving birth to me and kidnapped her in front of my father the Hokage, Minato Namikaze. My mother, it turned out, had been the container of the fox before me, and when the man kidnapped her he restrained her and put the Kyuubi under a submission illusion to control it before he released it right before my father arrived to save my mother and got her out of there. Obito then went to Konoha where he used a technique to instantly teleport the fox to my village and ordered it to attack. He finished the story of how he became the container for a not yet revealed hot as sin vixen. Looking at his audience he noticed how Zatanna narrowed her eyes and guessed she'd notice him not wanting to talk about his past. Thankfully fate happened to be the objective sort and continued with his questions. So there is no way for this beast to escape its prison? He asked. Naruto decided to give him a half-truth. No, it can't. If it were to force its way out that would kill me, so my father put an array onto the formula for the seal that dictates that if I die from anything other than old age the seal will implode on itself, temporarily killing the fox, allowing for the people to track down where it might reform and seal it away again. But me and the fox have an agreement for a give-and-take relationship. I can control its power for a small price, so it won't try to escape, I can assure you. Naruto said, making his voice assuring and hoping that there would be no more questions. Zatanna openly sighed in relief. The being she had been tracking down was just a guy from another dimension where he was a soldier with actual inner demons. At least he wasn't confrontational. When he wasn't acting goofy he almost reminded her of Batman, meaning that he didn't strike out unless it was absolutely necessary. Sighing, she couldn't help but say, at least we don't have to worry about this being a second Trigon. I mean I was, but she was cut off by Naruto crying out and grabbing his head all of a sudden like he had a pop-up migraine. In Naruto's head, he could literally hear the screams of a furious female. Where is he? Where is Trigon? Where is that little world-destroying runt? Were among the many things that he heard Kurama say in her angry tirade about this Trigon. Whoever he was, if he pissed Kurama off this badly, Naruto almost felt sorry for him. But that was beside the point. The point was he now had a splitting headache that didn't seem to be going away anytime soon. He closed the doors to his mind to block out most of the angry vixen's tirade, but some of it still got through. Looking at Zatanna, who seemed to be confused, he smiled wryly at her with his patented foxy grin. Whoever Trigon is, I almost feel sorry for him. He said. Why? Because Kurama's running around in my head screaming how she's going to tear apart an arrogant, world-destroying, little bastard. And when she gets her tails on him she's going to make him beg her to stop and beg for death. He explained as his headache slowly abated and realized he had forgotten to leave out a small detail. Wait, so this Kyuubi's a woman? Groaning, he watched as Zatanna went off on a female gloating spree about one of the most powerful beings in his universe being a woman. On the couch by a cheering Zatanna, Fate had many thoughts going through his mind about the possibilities that had just presented itself to him. If Trigon tried to force his way into their dimension again, they might have a way to counteract him and force him away. The moment was broken when Naruto thought of something that hadn't occurred to him since he got there because he had been swooped into learning about the world he had found himself in. Biting his thumb, which caught the attention of the two other occupants in the room, he went through a series of head seals. Boar dog bird monkey ram. And slammed his hand on the ground calling out, Kachiyose no Jutsu, summoning Jutsu. And the moment his hand touched the ground, a ceiling array spread out on the ground causing a plume of smoke to appear. When the smoke cleared, Zatanna and Dr. Fate were greeted to the sight of a large orange toad, wearing a blue jacket, which was taller than Naruto. The toad looked around before it spotted Naruto. The toad was still for a second before it yelled out, Aniki, where have you been? You said you would summon me for the beat down on that arrogant duck ass, and here I find you in some nice hotel with. He looked around and spotted Zatanna and Fate, some hot woman and what is that? He said, gesturing towards Dr. Fate. Okay Kichi, first of all, sorry about not summoning you and I don't know where I am. I'm just glad I could summon you. Second, the woman is Zatanna and the guy in the blue and gold outfit is Dr. Fate. And third, could you reverse summon us to Mount Myoboku? I want to get home? So wait, you could have gone home already? Zatanna asked, looking scandalized by the fact that she had just tracked down a guy who could have just left if he had just thought about it a little sooner. Looks like it, sorry. I guess I won't be able to help with your enemies like I'm sure you might have wanted. He said apologetically, while grabbing onto Gamakichi's jacket. Ready to go Kichi, he said to the toad. Right, the giant toad said before he disappeared in a plume of smoke. However, Zatanna and Fate heard a loud crash and definitely the sound of splintering wood before hearing Naruto scream out, "What the hell?" before the sight of Zatanna's room's coffee table up against the wall, broken with Naruto's struggling body through it and several hot cookies and broken china over him. Zatanna was the one who asked the golden question, what just happened? Down in the streets of Vegas, a well-fed Obito Uchiha walked down the street looking for something. After he had cooked his snake on the human inferno that he had made, he had eaten with gusto, and when he finished he caught 2 more snakes and filled himself up. After he had finished, he came down into the city where he started his search. Most people ignored him because of the compulsive genjutsu that he had placed over himself to remain under the radar. What he was looking for was 2 things. One was somebody who could speak his language and the other for some grunts to help his plan along to draw out the Uzumaki spawn. He was in luck as he had just spotted 2 men who were speaking his language, and even luckier, it looked like they were speaking to a group. The group didn't look like anything special, just some punks and tough guys who wanted to act like they all big and bad. All talk and no skill to back it up. Just like the brat, he had only injured him because of a fluke. Walking up to the group, he dropped the genjutsu. He announced his presence by clearing his throat. All the thugs turned to him immediately on their guard, with the guy who wore the tattered cloak and strange mask. Something about him just made them want to turn tail and run, but with an image to maintain they just couldn't run. The apparent leader of the gang walked up speaking in Obito's language. Yo, y'all, get the hell up outta here, this is Blue Moon territory. So just drop all y'all, money and valuables, and we just might let you go without roughing y'all up a bit. He said, and Obito got the message loud and clear, but he didn't like it one bit. Frowning under his mask, he simply backhanded the boy who dared to threaten him. He was an Uchiha. No one threatened him, especially not weaklings like that. Turning back to the rest of the group who seemed to be too scared to move except for the smart ones who had run before he had turned around, all waiting for what the masked man would do next. Reaching into his cloak, he pulled out a wad of explosive notes, and threw them to the ground before turning around while telling them, plant those in highly populated areas in this city. I don't care where, just as long as the places are heavily populated. He was stopped when a particularly brave, or was it stupid, thug in the group asked, what do we get out of it? Turning around, Obito's Sharingan locked onto the one who had spoken. Placing him in a minor genjutsu, Obito leaked large amounts of killing intent, causing the poor idiot to start to see images of his own death play out in front of him and unable to do anything but watch. With his Sharingan morphing into a windmill-like blade, he said only 2 words that made all of the punks, even the leader who he had backhanded, to lunge forward and grab the explosive tags in order to just get away from him, "Your lives." He answered simply before turning around, walking away from the scared groups. He stopped and grabbed one of the thugs randomly as he ran by. Turning the kid to face him, he said, "Could you tell me where I can get some chains?" Ravager frowned as she looked at her computer screen, which had the entire security network in the streets on it. She saw a local group of punks who called themselves the Blue Moons running around the Vegas Strip, placing little tags of paper onto buildings, sidewalks, or anywhere else that held a large number of people. Her instincts told her that something strange was going on, and whatever it was, it had to do with Shadow Fox. She had always trusted her instincts, just like her FA no. Deathstroke had taught her. This was no different. Getting out of her chair, she grabbed her leather jacket and stuck a knife in her boot. She had to figure out what was going on. In a bar down the street from her hotel, Zatanna was banging her table with her fist as she laughed at the story Naruto was telling her about when he was 12 and he painted his village's monument to their past leaders and outran his village's elite soldiers. "I tell you, I wore this bright, neon "Here I am, please come kill me" orange jumpsuit, and I still hid from them for over 2 hours before I was caught by my old school teacher, who happened to be 2 ranks below them. I think they might have made chasing me some kind of training regiment for their search and destroy missions, because after the war some of the members of that particular organization thanked me publicly for the training and I had no idea what they were talking about." Naruto finished regaling her in his stories of his time as the prankster king from hell. Zatanna couldn't believe that the man in front of her sipping beer with her was such a successful prankster, but she shuddered to think what would happen if he and the Joker ever got into a prank war. That was a disaster waiting to happen. After they had removed Naruto from the coffee table and repaired it, along with the wall and the china platter, Naruto and Dr. Fate tried to figure out why the reverse summoning had failed so violently. The doctor had him re-summon the frog, no, Toad, so that Fate could try. It worked that time, and Naruto summoned them back, and they returned to their pondering. After another failure for himself to reverse summon to the place the toads lived, Naruto simply wrote 2 letters which he instructed the large toad to give one to the Hokage and his former sensei, and the other to someone he referred to as Ba-chan. After that, Fate left saying he would look into matters, leaving Naruto alone with each other. After some awkward silence, Zatanna simply suggested they go to a bar and tell stories and get to know each other. She told him stories about her many adventures and how she had helped out some of the most well-known heroes in the world, who she had the delight of educating him on. But that had degraded into him making hilarious comments about why a grown-ass man would wear underwear outside his pants, and after a few laughs he told her stories about his old pranking habits. "Yeah, those were the good times, back before the war," he said wistfully with a far-off look in his eyes. That comment piqued Zatanna's interest, as it wasn't the first time he had mentioned this war, and he looked too young to be a war veteran, not to mention too stable as well. "You keep mentioning this war, would you mind telling me about it?" she asked, wanting to know more about the mysterious blonde. When he had mentioned how it wasn't easy being a Jinchuriki, her mind flashed back to the horror stories she had heard from Raven about her childhood on Azar. The isolation, repressing emotion, and the assassination attempts just for being the daughter of Trigon. Although she was in no place to judge those people, as she remembered how she had convinced the League to ignore Raven's pleas for help to stop her father because of the demon blood she had felt in Raven. She had nearly become the catalyst that caused the end of the world, and the Titans had nearly died fighting Trigon back. Because of that, she resolved never to misjudge Raven again, no matter what. Turning her attention back to Naruto, she was surprised to see a haunted look across his face. Naruto's memories flashed back to the war, legendary ninja, the Jubi, Neji, Shikaku and Inoichi. All those people had died to make sure he had some kind of shot before he had finally killed Kabuto and ended the Edo Tensei, which had been the beginning of the end for the Jubi. He finally answered her question with, "That war was a war of the dead and too many good people died for it. That's all I had to say." When he said it was a war for the dead, she assumed that he meant there was a large amount of casualties, but something told her he meant something completely different. Before anything else could be said, Naruto suddenly felt a large chakra spike just outside the bar. Going into his battle persona, he said in a cold voice, "Zatanna, throw a shield up." As soon as he said it, Zatanna did just that, because she knew that type of voice. It was the voice that she had heard Batman use whenever they had gotten into a tough spot. As soon as the shield was up, the front part of the bar was torn apart by an explosive wall of white-hot flames. The fires only made it past the front wall before Zatanna's wards stopped them, causing the flames to die away. There was only one person in the lot outside the bar, and it was no one Zatanna recognized. Looking over at Naruto, she saw flashes of recognition, disbelief, and most shockingly, total loathing of the person that he was seeing. To her, it was a man in a tattered cloak with red clouds, wearing a strange purple mask, who had just tried to kill them all. Naruto looked as if he could rip this man apart with his bare hands and wake up the next morning whistling a happy tune. All the hatred that was rolling off Naruto was palpable as his wild blonde hair became wilder. His eyes turned red and slitted, the cute whisker marks on his cheeks became deeper and more pronounced, and his nails became longer and sharper than any human's should be. All the hatred she could feel with her empathic abilities started to affect her, as well as she could feel herself start to hate the man as well. Before she did anything stupid, she closed off her emotions so they wouldn't connect to his. Feeling clear-headed, she paid attention to the intense stare down between the blonde man she had been with all night and the mysterious killer. Naruto said something, his voice gravelly, cold, and hateful, conveying all the hatred he felt for this man. Obito. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.